Hello everyone, my name is Sebastian, and this is my very first podcast episode of the Storytelling Podcast here on 93.5 FM KWDC Delta College Radio. In this podcast series, I'm going to be going more in depth on storytelling. Originally, I had 4 podcasts planned, but unfortunately, the first one that I had planned, which was going to be just storytelling itself, was not able to come through. However, I am able to put the theme of storytelling within these 3 podcasts, so that's what I'm going to be doing over the next couple of months. I'm going to be giving you 3 different podcasts. The first one today will be on how to write characters. The second one will be how to world build, and then the third one that will release in the beginning of December will be about continuations or sequels, as some like to say. However, today we're going to be strictly focusing on the topic of how to write characters, because you need characters to tell a story. Without having characters in a story, you can't tell a story. So they're required, they're needed for storytelling. So without further delay, let's hop into this first podcast episode on how to write characters. So to begin, you're going to have to start with the core idea. Now, what I mean by the core idea is before you begin writing anything, before you begin writing your story, you have to determine what kind of main character you are going to want to create. You're going to have to ask yourself a lot of questions, a lot of key questions, such as what stage of life are they in? Are they a child? Are they a teenager? Are they an adult? Are they a senior citizen? Very rarely in stories do you see it being about an infant, unless if you're watching something like Rugrats, then you could take creative liberties like that. But then you also have to ask yourself, what role do they play in the story? Are they a hero, a villain, a protagonist, an antagonist? What are the key traits do they have? Like, what is their gender? What is their personality? Their moral alignment? Their motivations, etc. This is going to be the foundation that helps you define their purpose in the story that you're going to be telling, and it will ensure that their presence is felt and feels intentional, and it feels meaningful by the end of the story that you're telling. Now, the next thing that you're going to include in your story is the side characters. Now, the side characters can enrich your story. They can help ground it and make it a believable world when you're reading. They can reflect different aspects of humanity, and they could serve many purposes in your story. I do want to make one thing clear, however. Side characters are not always needed in a story. If you have a story about just a single person, then you could write about that single person. You don't need to have side characters, but if they meet someone along the way, then there would be side characters that were to be included. I would even go as far as to saying that stuff like maybe an animal, like let's say they have a companion with them, like a dog or a cat, that could technically be a side character. However, to give a few examples of side characters, let's start with the male characters. Now, male characters can serve as mentors. They could serve as rivals, inspirations for your main character, especially when their presence challenges or supports the protagonist's growth throughout the story. Female side characters, they often tend to bring compassion, understanding, or emotional balance to a story that's being told, though they can also be complex and powerful in their own right. Love interests aren't always necessary for a story. However, having a close companion who shares emotional chemistry or mutual understanding, then you could, I guess, hint towards a possible love interest in the future, either in the later parts of this story or a future story that you choose to write about. Now, the next thing that is going to be needed in writing this story for character aspect, you have to write the antagonist. Now, an antagonist doesn't have to be purely evil. They simply need to just stand out and be the opposition to the protagonist's goals and beliefs. To give you a few examples, you have to give your antagonist a purpose. Giving your antagonist a clear reason for their actions, their motivations, should feel just as real, if not more complex and more real than the main character's character. Another thing you have to do is you have to give them a connection. Consider how they relate to the main character. Are they family? Are they an old friend? Are they a rival? Or they could just be a stranger whose life has somehow intertwined with the main characters. Now, you also have to give them depth. I would suggest avoiding to create a villain who's just evil for the sake of being evil. I would recommend more to explore why they are the way they are. Maybe their actions could come from pain, they could come from fear, it could be because they're a misguided soul, you know? Now, the final thing I would suggest for the antagonist, you have to give him a perspective. In some cases, the main character themselves can be the antagonist, depending on the story and the theme of the structure. But a perspective for the antagonist could also help because it could show you how they think through their eyes. Now, for the part that's absolutely needed in these characters' character, you have to give them a backstory. A backstory can be a very strong thing. It could give life to your characters. It can add emotional weight to your story. You could do things like show how your main character connects to the supporting cast of characters that you've written. You can reveal how certain past events brought some of the characters together. You can also explore how the past continues to affect each character, for better or for worse, that is. Just remember, the backstory doesn't have to be told all at once. You can let it unfold naturally through dialogue, through flashbacks, or subtle hints. For example, I had written a story. There was one character that was a bit of a mystery, but there was little hints tossed in there of their backstory. And if you were to piece it all together, you would realize his timeline is not a good one, and he is the way he is because of his past. Now, the next thing that you're going to require is a cohesive narrative. Every character, no matter how minor, should contribute to the overall story. Ensuring that all the characters' actions and motivations align with the central narrative is a must. Keeping the story's progression clear and logical, trying to avoid unnecessary confusion or even contradictions. And I would say to also make sure that each character's journey should support the story's emotional and thematic arc. Now, I do want to talk about one aspect of character writing that isn't necessarily required, but it could be a really great thing to include if it's done right in a story, and that is the twist characters. A twist character can add depth, it can surprise your story, and it can even make it more exciting in a way, if it is executed well, that is. To take the time to plan their role of how they fit into the narrative is a tedious one because you have to not only put some setup, but you have to write it all out to be cohesive enough and have it make sense for the story. Like I said, plant subtle hints and subtle clues early on so that it will be making sense for that reveal that happens later on. When it is done correctly, a twist character can leave a lasting impression on the viewer or the reader, and it can make your story more memorable. To give an example of a twist character, Terminator 2 has one of the greatest twists in all of cinema history. In that movie, Arnold was playing the Terminator, obviously, but in the first movie, he was the villain. However, in this one, there seemed to be two Terminators. People had the idea that they were both after John Connor, but the moment that Arnold shows up and he starts protecting him was one of the greatest twists ever pulled off because no one saw that coming and they were rooting for him now. Moving on past that point, the next thing that I would recommend is taking inspiration. You can take inspiration from anywhere, whether it's your own life, the world around us, or even media that we consume on a daily basis. I would say draw from your personal experiences and emotions to create authentic characters, but at the same time, you don't want to make it a carbon copy of yourself. You want to just take inspiration from it. I would also say that taking inspiration from stories, films, games, or even history could resonate well with the character that you're trying to write. I would also say to pay attention to people, pay attention to events and interactions in the everyday lives that we live. Reality often provides the best material for fiction, just need to know how to find it. The next thing that you're going to need for characters is the motivations and the goals of the characters. Every strong character has something they want, a goal that drives their actions. For example, motivation is why they want it, and it reveals their values, it reveals their fears, it reveals their desires even. The goal that is what they're trying to achieve, whether it's survival, revenge, love, redemption, or even discovery. All of this can clearly define these things. This will guide how your character reacts to challenges and how they grow throughout the story. For example, a soldier's motivation is to protect his family, while his goal is to win a war or whatever fight he's in to return home safely to see that family. This next one, in a way, is kind of a big one because I feel that you need to have this so that the characters can actually work and connect with people. You have to give them flaws and you have to give them strength. Perfect characters are kind of boring in my eyes. They don't really interest me when they don't have flaws, but they just have the strength. You kind of need both to bounce off of each other. Flaws make them human, in my opinion. Flaws create conflict, they create tension and opportunities for growth for any of your characters, whether it's the main character, the side characters, or background characters, I guess. Strength gives them the power to overcome those obstacles, and it doesn't mean that they get rid of those flaws. They could still have those flaws, but they just grew strength out of it. Make sure both their strength and their flaws influence the story's outcome. Again, going back to the cohesive thing, you have to keep this cohesive as well. For an example, a character's bravery might be admirable, but it could also make them reckless, or it can make them impulsive. Moving on from the flaws and the strengths, the next thing that I would recommend you also use for writing characters is you have to give them a personality and you have to give them a voice. A character's voice, I don't mean just how they speak, but like how they also sound, how they think, and how they react. That is going to set them apart from each other. Think about their tone, their speech patterns, their mannerisms, their personalities should shape how they handle problems and how they interact with one another. Keeping consistency in their personalities helps readers connect, and it helps them to remember them individually through their voices and through their personalities. Tip I would suggest is try writing a short monologue or dialogue in their voices to see if they sound unique to you, because if they do sound unique enough, then the readers will usually find them unique. The next thing that you're going to want to write with these characters is the relationships and then the dynamics that they have with one another. Characters rarely exist in isolation. Their relationships define who they are and reveal different sides of them. Consider how they treat friends, how they treat rivals, mentors, enemies, and even how they treat strangers. Show how the relationships change over time, how loyalty can fade or how it could grow, how love can grow or how that could fade, and how trust could be broken. Also, keep in mind that relationship arcs can mirror or contrast the main plot. For example, if there's someone turning against another or two people that have to come together, that could be contrasted or mirrored in the plot itself. Speaking of the plot, character arcs, or in other words, growth and change for your character. A great character changes with some way by the end of the story. Do they grow to become something stronger, something wiser, or do they fall consumed by their flaws and their failures? The arc should feel earned, shaped by the choices that they made, not by the coincidences that are presented in the story. Even if they don't change much, their lack of change should still make a statement about who they are as a person in this story. For an example of a character arc, there's this other story that I wrote where this guy was gifted power. He didn't want to be a leader at first, but when he had no other choice, he finally decided to stand up for what was right, and he became the leader that everyone knew that he could be. In addition to character arcs, you should also have conflict and an internal struggle. To me, I would have to say that conflict is the heart of storytelling, and it should exist both externally and internally. For external conflict, the obstacles they face in the world, like enemies, nature, and society, could be included. For internal conflict, the struggles with themselves, fear, guilt, pride, temptation, all things that are just like either of those are related to one another in some shape or form. Characters who face both kinds of conflict feel more layered and they feel more real to me. Okay, everyone, I hope you're having a good time listening to this podcast. We are going to be taking a short break now, but we will be right back after these messages.
The more you listen to your kids, the closer you'll be. So we asked kids, what do you want your parents to hear?
I feel sometimes that I'm not listened to. I would just want you to listen to me more often and evaluate situations with me and lead me towards success.
We're not adults, so just be there and listen. I just want someone to yap to. And I just feel like I'll be fine if someone just hears me talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk.
You're doing a really good job. And I don't think I tell you that enough. And I know sometimes we get into it and it's just hard on both of us, but try to understand me more, and I'll try to do the same.
Listening is a form of love. Find resources to help you support your kids and their emotional well-being at sounditouttogether.org. That's sounditouttogether.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and Pivotal.
The word father means a lot to me. Being that support system for them, and as a man, that's important in a child's life. I think men can be a little stubborn sometimes where they may want the help, they may not know how to ask. It's hard for a man to speak his emotions. Those tears, they mean something. Wrap away. Tears are water, and water is life. And when you shed those tears, that's love. That's real love. Sometimes as dads, I think we're too hard on ourselves. Life can come at you really quick, and it can be really tough at times. But then you put that one foot in front of the other, and you keep doing the right thing. Slowly that voice goes away, Wrap away, you gotta pray for yourself, as well as for everybody else, but never forget yourself.
Never stop being a dad. That's dedication. Find out more at fatherhood.gov. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a good short little break there. Now let's continue on this first episode of the storytelling podcast of how to write characters. Before we cut to the break, we were talking about the conflict and the internal struggles of the characters. Now, something that's also related to that is going to be needed for when you're writing characters is the symbolism and the themes of the characters. Sometimes characters can represent ideas or themes larger than themselves within a story, so you have to ask yourself the necessary questions. What does your character stand for? Does he stand for hope? Do they stand for chaos? Do they stand for justice? Maybe they could stand for greed, or they could even stand for freedom. You could have some subtle symbolism in your story. For example, you could show it through their actions, you could show it through their choices, or even the design of the story. I would also recommend that their journey might embody the theme of your story. For example, it can mean redemption, it can mean the cost of power, it can mean corruption. A lot of different things, but they could all use this template of symbolism and themes for how the journey is shown to us, or rather told. Now for the part that is probably the biggest, or at least one of the biggest things that you must include when you're telling a story: the visual design or description of your characters. Whether you're writing just a simple book or a screenplay for a movie or TV show, or writing for an animation that's going to be done, you have to have a clear image of the character so that it could help readers and viewers visualize who these characters are as people. Describing their appearances, their posture, and their style in ways that reflect their personalities will help them greatly. I would say to avoid overly generic or list-like descriptions. Instead, I would suggest focusing on details that actually tell a story about their appearance. An example that I could give you of this: instead of saying she wore a red jacket, try saying this instead: her jacket was worn at the elbows, a keepsake from the days when she still believed she could outrun her past. Giving the reader or the viewer more detail like that will greatly enhance how they're going to see these characters and how they visualize these characters. Now, following from visual design and description, the next part that we are going to have to talk about is consistency and realism. Even in fantasy or sci-fi adventures, characters need consistent logic and they need consistent emotion to show so that it can feel real to the reader or to the viewer that's reading or seeing whatever story they're seeing. Their decisions should make sure to make sense based on who they are and what they've experienced throughout the story. And consistency doesn't mean that they can't surprise the reader, but surprises should feel more earned and believable than just throwing it out there as just a coincidence. An example that I can give is from another one of my stories. These characters tend to have superpowers, and they're in a war that they're constantly fighting. It's a war between creation and destruction. They're the side of creation while the enemy is the side of destruction. But even in this war that's going on, some of the characters break down because they don't want to be part of this, but it's taking a toll on their mental health and it's really messing with them. Another example I can give is when one of the characters in this specific story ended up defeating the villain. He didn't kill him, but he did just start breaking down, and all the others had to start comforting him. They knew the severity of how bad this battle specifically had been for their main teammate. The final thing that I want to include for how to write characters, this is probably the most important thing that I recommend anyone should add to this, but you have to get this part right for this character to not only attach to people, but for people to get invested, and that is the character introduction. I would say the best way to define a character introduction is the same way of how people say the first impression usually matters, because I really do believe that the first impression when it comes to stories, it does matter for when you're meeting the character. How you are to introduce a character can define how an audience perceives them and how they will be perceiving them for the rest of the time that you're spending with them in this specific story that you're focusing on. One thing you can do is show their personality through their actions, not just exposition. There's a saying that some people like to say, it's show don't tell. Well, you could do that, but make sure to do it in a correct way. And the same could be said for the opposite, where it's tell don't show. Another thing that I would personally say to recommend is let the readers see how others react to the characters that you have written in the story. Because if they have an outside source telling them, hey, these characters are actually really great, they're actually really likable, then you're going to be wanting to read whatever story that is. Or even movie-wise, you would want to see whatever movie that is where it has these great characters in them. A powerful character introduction can hint at their role, it could hint at their attitude, their inner conflict without revealing everything all at once about the character. So if it is handled correctly, it should go well with the reader or with the audience. Now, as an example of a character introduction that I am going to give, I'm going to give two. One from actual media and then one from my own writings that I've done. So in the 2007 movie Transformers, directed by Michael Bay, the introduction scene to Optimus Prime and the other Autobots are one of the best scenes that have been in that movie. So the way that it plays out, you have Shia LaBeouf and Megan Fox's character Sam and Michaela watching as Optimus and the other Autobots drive up around them. Then they all start transforming, and specifically with Optimus Prime, you get to see him through the POV of Sam and Michaela. You can tell that this guy is the leader and he is here for a purpose, and that purpose in the movie is for Sam, because Sam holds the key for their future. The next and the final example that I am going to be giving is from one of my own stories. So in this story, it takes place in a world that is somewhat medieval. In this kingdom, there's a lot of corruption and the rich take pleasure in messing with the poor. But the main character of this story, he's a knight for the king. He sees the corruption that's going on and he disagrees with the way that the king runs the place. When we're introduced to him, he goes over to a rich man that is currently trying to take money from one of the poor people in this village, and he proceeds to get him off of her, and then he beats him a little to ensure that this woman will be safe. And afterwards, he gives the woman some money so she can go rebuy her groceries. He didn't need to do this, but he did it out of a gesture that he was raised with. And in this part of the story, it tells the reader, okay, he's not like the rest of the people in this kingdom seem to be. So it's that type of character where it's like, okay, you're attached to this one because you could tell he's different from the rest. And with that little bit of information being said, that's the end of this podcast as of now. So to recap, we started with a core idea. We moved on to side characters, then to the antagonist, the backstory, a cohesive narrative, it twists characters, inspiration that you can take, motivation and goals for your characters, flaws and strengths for your characters, personality and voices for each character, relationship dynamics for each character, the character arcs that are going to be taken by the character, conflict and internal struggles, symbolism and themes, visual design or description, consistency and realism, and then finally, the most important one, character introductions. We covered all 17 of these things that make characters. I know for a fact there are probably more, but these are the ones that have always stood out to me the most and are the ones that I decided to talk to you all about today. The Storytelling Podcast has been a production of KWDC 93.5 LPFM, Delta College Radio. This program was made possible by listeners like you. Programming is produced by the students, staff, and faculty of San Joaquin Delta College's Digital Media Department and supported by the Delta College Department of Arts and Media, the Career Technical Education and Workforce Development Office, and the State of California. Thank you for listening.